Hello, dear friends. My name is Sofya Dorinskaya. I am a doctor, head of the Medical Information Center. I am very glad to meet you again on the channel Evidence-Based Medicine. And today I am starting a video. There will be several videos from the series Vitamins for the Eyes. And today we will look at the vitamin that is one of the first things the eye needs. Vitamin A is essential for eye health. Let's start with the fact that there are signs that indicate a person has a vitamin A deficiency. And these signs are related to the eyes. How can you determine a vitamin A deficiency? By the condition of the eyes. And when we have hypovitaminosis, that is an insufficient amount, however, this does not yet represent a truly painful or severe deficiency state of vitamin A. Instead, a person gradually develops what is commonly known as night blindness, or medically termed hemeralopia. This is a specific physiological condition characterized by the human eye's persistent inability to properly adapt to sudden or subtle changes in environmental lighting conditions. Night blindness, as it's commonly called, means a person simply stops seeing well at dusk. That is, as soon as the lighting drops a little bit, the person already loses the ability to distinguish things and, well, their vision just deteriorates. At this time of day, the next stage occurs called xerophthalmia or dryness of the eye. Let me remind you, I've said this many times already, but repetition is the mother of learning. Let's recall that when a person has a vitamin A deficiency, there is increased shedding of the epithelium, and a phenomenon occurs where non-keratinizing epithelial tissues, the epithelial and mucous membranes, become keratinizing epithelia. So why does dryness of the eye or xerophthalmia occur? Because the epithelium in the tear duct sheds and the tear fluid can no longer reach the surface to moisten the eye. As a result, the eye dries out, and then what is known as a leucoma can develop. Yes, when the epithelium of the eye actually starts to keratinize and the person simply can't see anything anymore. There have been some very interesting studies when we talk about communication. Now, let's talk about vitamin A. It is primarily stored within the liver. In fact, when considering the human body, the very first organ in terms of its overall vitamin A content is definitely the liver. And the second organ is the eye. And here I found a very interesting study. And this is a statement that says, in the vessels of the retina, in the vessels of the eye, the vitamin A content is 4 to 5 times lower than in the retina itself. But what is contained in the blood vessels of the eye? Carotene is present. Furthermore, there is a widely held opinion that in order for a person to maintain good vision, they need not only a sufficient amount of vitamin A, but they also require provitamin A, also known as carotene. If we talk about foods, these are all red and orange foods, such as carrots, which everyone knows about. But when a person consumes these types of healthy foods, they should ideally contain some kind of fat. For example, consider a fresh carrot salad dressed with a bit of sour cream or vegetable oil. Literally, all you need is just a single spoonful or so to make it work. And when you see that orange, that oily orange mixture, that's what we're talking about. Or when the sour cream takes on that distinct yellowish tint, that is actually the essential beta-carotene that our bodies truly require. So when we discuss the importance of maintaining healthy vision and overall eye wellness, this fundamental idea comes up once again, that a person's daily nutritional intake should be incredibly diverse and well balanced. And it is certainly not the case that you can simply take regular vitamins, those standard pharmaceutical ones, and then completely ignore the importance of eating truly tasty, healthy, and diverse food every single day. I know there are people like that. especially those who live with the idea of losing weight, who they eat practically nothing else besides plain chicken breast with a very small, simple side dish on the plate. And they mistakenly hope and believe that by taking various synthetic vitamins, they will adequately cover every single nutritional requirement in their lives, that they will successfully meet all of their body's daily needs. But you can't get away from the fact that a person's diet should be varied, which of course does not rule out taking vitamins externally, including pharmaceutical vitamins. But in fact, practice shows that this works. However, no one has cancelled a varied diet, which also helps to obtain nutrients. There is a study. It was conducted in India on children who were found to have avitaminosis. And these were children. What doses were used? So, a dose of 100,000 IU turned out to be insufficient for the signs of vitamin deficiency to start disappearing in children. For comparison, a typical dose, for example, in a capsule is 30 or 33,000 IU. You see, when a person already has a deficiency, the dose needs to be increased. And immediately the question of hypervitaminosis arises. This is the scare story spread by uninformed people or people with some kind of agenda, with some kind of motive. So regarding vitamin A hypervitaminosis, in experiments with rabbits and cats, it was not possible to induce vitamin A hypervitaminosis. They couldn't achieve it even in experiments. Only in rats was it possible to induce vitamin A hypervitaminosis in experiments. Moreover, these rats were on a special diet. I understand that if this test subject had been allowed to eat what it wanted, even though it was externally receiving a large amount of vitamin A, I think the rat would have compensated for it through its diet. As for humans, as far as we know, and this is known everywhere, literally the only recorded case of vitamin A hypervitaminosis in humans involved polar explorers. They simply ate the liver of a polar bear. And when they calculated how much vitamin A they had consumed, it turned out to be 8 million units, these international units. 100,000 versus 8 million. And they ate this liver for some time. But the symptoms of hypervitaminosis disappeared as soon as they simply stopped eating it. To put it another way, since vitamins are essential nutrients, trying to compensate for the effects of an excessive intake of a vitamin is a very difficult task indeed. Like when a person overeats a certain food, since all vitamins are components of a regular diet. And this goes away when you just stop taking such high doses. This is very interesting evidence, and I can say that it took me a lot of effort and investigation to find literature where all of this is described. When we consider a person, what specific circumstances and challenging situations in an individual's life might require a greater amount of support to help them cope. Intake of vitamin A. And first and foremost, these are inflammatory diseases, with absolutely all inflammatory diseases of any kind, no matter what hurts. A person needs an increased intake of vitamin A. In hyperthyroidism, vitamin A, thyroxine is an antagonist of vitamin A. Therefore, if a person has hyperthyroidism, they have a need for increased intake of vitamin A. If this does not happen, the person moves toward vitamin A deficiency. With various debilitating diseases such as inflammation of the intestines, inflammation of the liver, inflammation of the pancreas, inflammation of the gallbladder, these are all debilitating diseases in which a person is forced to follow certain diets. That's the first point. Then second, the secretions of the pancreas and the secretion of the liver. Through this very bile, they are necessary for the absorption of vitamin A. Therefore, if a person has problems with these secretions, then once again, they develop a vitamin A deficiency. And This is a situation that requires increased intake. Liver diseases also prevent the conversion of carotene into vitamin A. There's a particular feature here. As for food products, there is some very interesting data. Pork fat contains a substance that is an antagonist to vitamin A. And there have even been cases described where people showing signs of vitamin A deficiency who stopped eating pork fat had their vitamin metabolism and its effects on the body restored. In other words, the signs of vitamin A deficiency disappeared, including those eye-related symptoms I mentioned earlier. Because as you understand, vitamin A deficiency is a systemic mechanism. It has a systemic effect, and we will talk about this now. As for pork fat, if any of my viewers really do have signs of vitamin deficiency, and if a person realizes that they just eat this pork fat, that they really enjoy it, then you need to reduce your intake or stop eating it for a while and later on just have a few small pieces just to satisfy your own taste buds. The amount of protein in the diet plays a major role in vitamin metabolism. I actually wrote down this phrase from a very old monograph. It's very interesting, of course. Doctors describe this. Once again, the amount of protein in the diet plays a major role in vitamin metabolism. What does this mean? It means that people who have a protein deficient diet, and I will repeat once more that the human body belongs to the class of omnivorous organisms. And the most easily digestible proteins for the human body are animal proteins, meat, poultry, organ meats, caviar, fish, which contain a fairly high amount of protein. These are proteins that are very easily absorbed by the human body, unlike plant-based foods. So people who consumed enough animal protein at least 3 times a day. In general, I recommend, of course, eating meat to satiety at every meal. As for children, they should definitely receive meat 4 to 5 times a day. A good portion, 100 to 150 grams, or even 200 grams depending on age. So research indicates that people who consume adequate amounts of animal protein tend to exhibit noticeable signs of vitamin deficiency, developing at a much slower rate, compared to those individuals who significantly restrict their daily protein intake. I mentioned that vitamin A deficiency is systemic. You understand this perfectly well, of course. I hope everyone studied biology in school, and I hope it is still being taught now. That epithelium. It is one of the tissues that is found throughout the body. Epithelium lines the glands, the ducts of the glands, the intestine, in general, everything everywhere. And I have said many times that, for example, the nature of stones like gallstones, kidney stones, or bladder stones is precisely a deficiency of vitamin A. This is that very increased shedding of the epithelium, which then gets retained and later becomes saturated, or to use the correct term, impregnated with salts. And in this way, this epithelium saturated with salts then turns into a stone. This is what stone disease is. But also, since there are ducts in, for example, glands, ducts lined with epithelium, cysts can also form. These are consequences of vitamin A deficiency. That is to say, the epithelium gradually sloughs off into the duct. It eventually blocks this duct entirely, and the essential metabolic processes in the gland come to a complete stop. And right here, I would very much like to share this specific thought with you. These are the people who will start following my advice on taking vitamin A. What might happen? You understand yourself that when we have some part of the body, whether large or small, in this case a cyst is a small part of the body, so we have a blockage and now we have a cyst. That is, there is a certain stasis there, a certain stoppage of metabolic processes, deficiencies, and nutritional deficits in the cells. the cells begin to die off, and naturally various types of things settle on the dying cells. Various types of inflammation may occur. There are signs of stagnation. And what happens when a person starts to address this condition? So we eliminate the vitamin A deficiency. Our epithelial tissues return to normal. The blockage of the gland duct disappears. And what does the body discover? The human body begins to discover internal stagnation with signs of inflammation, with noticeable signs of cellular changes, and with significantly altered cells. The human body has to deal with these complex changes. And at the very first stage of this process, it may frequently happen that the person experiences some temporary worsening of their overall condition, such as some localized pain, some general discomfort, or even some sharp fleeting pains. Of course, no one has ever cancelled the fundamental fact that individual reactions vary. In this specific case, it is definitely much better to go and see a qualified doctor for a professional consultation. If, for example, the inflammation requires medical treatment, such as prescribing antibiotics, this must be done. I repeat once again, vitamin deficiencies are one condition. And the fact that I study vitamin deficiencies, the information we gather, the thousands of cases, the thousands of people who go through the deficiency elimination program, which confirm this thesis that at the root of all diseases, practically all diseases, or actually all diseases, I can't even exclude any condition if you know where to look, there wouldn't be some kind of deficiency or some complex of deficiencies, whether primary, secondary, and so on, at its core. So at the root of nutrient deficiencies, vitamin deficiencies, right? But then secondary pathology becomes independent. And it's true that when it comes to this secondary pathology, even after you eliminate the vitamin deficiency, this secondary pathology often requires treatment on its own. That's exactly why vitamins are not medicines for secondary pathologies. It's about what a person is looking at. For example, a woman is looking at ovarian cysts. But the root cause of this is a vitamin deficiency. And just as you can't cure cysts without knowing about vitamin deficiencies and without taking them into account in your treatment plan, the same goes for, say, if an inflammatory process has started and you need to use antibacterial therapy, then you do need to use it, but at the same time you must also address the vitamin deficiency in parallel and not forget about it. What I'm getting at is that if a person starts, let's say they watched this video, understood it, and began applying this information, and suddenly they start feeling worse, well, that's not actually getting worse. It means that the body has finally identified the exact point of the problem. And now the body can deal with this problem. Don't forget, as I've said several times already, and I'll repeat it again, for example, in a work like the 1978 WHO report on nutrition, in the section on tuberculosis, it is stated directly that with vitamin deficiencies, there can be a false negative reaction to the same tuberculosis. What does this mean? It means that the body doesn't even have the strength to react to this disease. And the tests that are performed on a person show that there is no tuberculosis at all. But when the root cause of this disease begins to be addressed, and the root cause is always vitamin deficiencies, tuberculosis is a deficiency of niacin, vitamin C, and vitamin A. These are the three vitamin deficiencies that a doctor must always address when treating tuberculosis, if of course they actually want to cure it and not drag the process out indefinitely. So when the vitamin deficiencies begin to be corrected, the body finally gains the strength to manifest the disease and start fighting it. That's what I wanted to say on this matter. Therefore, if you start correcting vitamin deficiencies and things seem to get worse, so to speak, this needs to be interpreted correctly and handled properly. I hope this video was very interesting. For example, I really like the data that I hadn't come across anywhere else regarding the content. regarding the intake of carotene, which is provitamin A, and vitamin A itself. For example, that lard is an antagonist of vitamin A. So these are quite interesting facts. I found this data. I also want to remind you that when we reach 500,000 subscribers on our channel, by the way, our channel, I noticed that about 30% of viewers watch without subscribing. So please subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything. And for those who have been subscribed for a long time, it will be especially nice because when we reach 500,000 subscribers, we will give away 3 sets of these wonderful books, Hypo and Avitaminosis by Professor Lepsky. And by the way, there is a lot of information here about vitamin A, and a lot is dedicated to this vitamin, both in children and women, and its connection to reproductive function. Here there's a lot of introduction to clinical practice, and of course in this book about vitaminosis and hypovitaminosis as well. We will give away 3 sets and send them to any place on the planet to our subscribers. I want to remind you that the evidence-based medicine groups exist on Vkontakte, Odnoklasniki, and Facebook. On Vkontakte, our subscriber count is growing quite well. Go ahead and subscribe. In the feed, I will start publishing information. There's been a lot of interesting information during this time, and I also periodically find things there. Interesting quotes from books about hypo and avitaminosis that directly address certain problems. Take a look. There are already quite a lot of them published there. Book quotes. Thank you very much for your attention. See you next time. In the next video, let me remind you that the Center for Medical Information conducts testing for nutrient deficiencies. Unfortunately, blood tests are not informative when it comes to nutrient deficiencies. Only the symptoms show what is actually happening in the cell, what processes are taking place in the cell, and whether the nutrient has reached the cell from the bloodstream or not. Only the symptoms can tell us this. This is what our screening test is designed to determine. And this also allows us to guide a person on the path to eliminating nutrient deficiencies and restoring their health. So I invite everyone who is in need, please come. The website is Dorinskaya.com. I look forward to seeing you all. Thank you. Goodbye.